Okay, guys, as promised, I am back with another creepy story. This is a true story. We are going to label it the Evil Island of Italy. Some places in this world easily lend themselves to stories of hauntings or curses. There is no certain look or a certain bloody background that just make them ripe picking for scary tales, and they become the very incarnation of what our minds envision when we think of what a haunted place should look like. Considering this, there are perhaps few places on earth that quite so perfectly match the criteria for a haunted place as the morose lonely island of Poveglia in Italy. Gruesome, gory history. Check. Mass secret burial grounds. Check. A long tradition of human suffering. Check. Crumbling, darkened buildings overgrown with weeds. Check. Abandoned insane asylum full of creepy stories. Check. As we shall see, there are a great many reasons why this mysterious island has earned its reputation as the world's most haunted island and has been variously called the Island of Madness, the world's darkest epic center and cesspool of dread. Poveglia Island is one of the many small islands that dot the Venetian lagoon of northern Italy. It is located between Venice and Lido. The island is thick with a long, trusted, and tumultuous history that has a large shadow of evil and sinister going-ons looming over it. The first inhabitants here came in the year 421 AD in order to escape the barbarian hordes that were raging Venice at the time. It was not a peaceful lifestyle. These bedraggled early inhabitants were beset by ramping barbarians, regularly fighting with commonplace as they thought to keep the hordes at bay. In the 9th century, despite the huge amount of blood that had been spilled on its soil, Poveglia became more populous and was steadily inhabited for centuries until its people were displaced in 1379 in order for the government to use the island as a station with which to battle attacking fleets from the Genoese, with whom the Venetians had a long-standing blood rivalry. The intimidating octagonal battlement that was erected for this purpose still stands today. There are also rumors that say Poveglia was used as a base by the English from which to ambush and slaughter French soldiers during the Napoleonic War, a claim which is somewhat supported by various French shipwrecks still lingering in the bottom of the lagoon. It is said that French commandos who were captured where they brought onto the island and ruthlessly burned alive, adding to the turbulent violence that already plagued the island's past. The island then remained uninhabited and mostly forgotten until the bubonic plague swept through Europe, leaving death in its wake. The government, famous for its strict sanitary laws, turned several of the islands of the Venetian lagoon, including Poveglia, into special quarantine stations referred to as lazarettos, starting from 1403. These quarantine stations were typically used to confine people who displayed symptoms of the plague and were thought to be ill, after which, if they were found to be healthy, they could go on their way after a set time had passed, and then they had been given a clean bill of health, usually about 40 days. It is, in fact, the Italian word for 40 days, quaranta giorni, from which the modern term quarantine comes from. However, as the plague grew worse and the death toll mounted, these quarantine stations went from slightly unpleasant holding facilities to more like hell on earth. As the plague reached a furious pitch, those who exhibited even the slightest symptoms were banished to the island to live out their remaining days in agony, and quarantine stations became dumping grounds for thousands of rotting bodies that were left in the wake of the disease, which were thrown into hastily dug grave pits and buried or burned. The worst outbreak of the Black Death between 1629 and 1631, an estimated 80,000 people perished in just 7 months, and the Venetian lazarettos earned a reputation for being putrid pits of decomposing diseased corpses and the sickly walking dead. As the panicked government desperately tried to staunch the spread of the disease, many people were dragged unwillingly away from their homes and families to be brought kicking and screaming to this island to die, or even be hastily thrown onto the many stacks of bodies that were being incinerated while they were still alive. The victims would live in squalid conditions, often in great pain and anguish, with the threat of being burned alive hanging over their heads, and very little in a way of treatment from the somber doctors that patrolled the islands wearing creepy long-nosed masks packed with herbal concoctions in the attempt to prevent contracting the illnesses themselves. Italy would eventually lose ground, around 1/3 of the population, to the plague, and many of the victims found their final resting places in the scorched, blood-soaked earth of the island and other islands like it. Okay. Even when the worst of the plague was over, Venice remained vigilant. In 1776, the island was taken off the public health office, or Magistrato alla Santina, and subsequently used as a quarantine checkpoint for all people and goods being transported by ship from the Adriatic Sea to the Venetian lagoon. After 2 cases of the plague were found aboard ships in 1793, the island was once again transformed into a confinement station for suspected victims until the lazaretto closed its doors in 1814. It is thought that over the island's history during the dark years of the bubonic plague, the corpses of around 160 men, women, and child from all walks of life and levels of society ended up there. So many that it is said much of the island soil is composed of human ash. By the 1900s, the dark history of death and decay already saturated the land there, but the island had not yet seen the end of its morbid destiny. In 1922, existing buildings on the island were renovated and turned into an asylum for the mentally ill. Not long after, the patients here started complaining of seeing ghosts and hearing disembodied wailing voices, but at the time, these claims were treated as merely the ranting of deranged, insane minds. The island's history as a psychiatric hospital contains a good deal of dark lore. It is said that one sadistic doctor there began performing demented experiments on patients and was convinced that lobotomies were a sound way to treat and cure whatever was ailing their tortured souls. The doctor allegedly conducted all manner of lobotomies on his unwilling patients, using tools such as hammers, nails, drills, and chisels, with very little of it having any sound theographical basis, and none of it with any sort of attention to safety or sanitation. The doctor also purposely performed other mysterious experiments on patients within the hospital's bell tower, and it was not uncommon for patients to be kept awake at night by the screams and pain and despair emanating from the tower at night, to add to those of the ghosts they already heard. Things did not end well for the good doctor. The story goes that the doctor began to be harassed by ghosts, menacing shadows, and strange voices gibbering away in his head. After being driven stark raving mad from the constant phantom assaults, it is said that the doctor proceeded to throw himself, or in some accounts was thrown by some unknown force, from the top of the bell tower, the very same one where he had committed these deranged atrocities. A nurse who purportedly witnessed the event would later claim that the doctor had survived the initial fall, but his twisted, broken body had then been wrecked in mysterious mist as he lay there in agony, which then violently choked him to death. A persistent rumor is that the doctor's body was subsequently bricked up within the walls of the hospital. The asylum was closed in 1968, but a time-worn, washed-out sign reading Repartio Psychiatric Department still marks the location and serves as a reminder of its creepy past. The decrepit buildings also remain standing as well, complete with barred windows, stacks of abandoned moldy beds and bed frames, and institutional drowsy-painted halls, perhaps still prowled by the ghost of the long-legged lunatics, or were they lunatics? Upon the closing of the hospital, the island was used mostly for agricultural, such as vineyards, and was only sporadically inhabited. The stories of those who have tried to purchase the island and live on it are surrounded by weirdness. One person who owned the island in the 1960s quickly abandoned it for unknown reasons, and another family who had planned to build a vacation home here suddenly gave up on their dream. Although they would not elaborate on why they had abruptly decided not to live here, a history of plague, murder, and death perhaps, rumor has it that the daughter of the family had mysteriously had her face split or ripped open while on the island, and grievous injury that had allegedly required 14 stitches. There has never been any explanation as to what happened to her to inflict such a wound, but the popular rumor is that some violent entity brutally attacked her. With such a long, gruesome history of blood and misfortune, it is perhaps no surprise at all that the island, with its spooky, crumbling buildings overrun with weeds, and its earth filled with plague pits and skeletons, anguished souls, is considered to be extremely haunted. This is a place that excludes a sense of menace and malice. Many who come here report being immediately beset with heavy feeling of dread and despair, which seem to hang in the air like shrouded clouds. There are those who, upon setting foot on the island, suddenly overcome with uncontrollable urge to turn back and flee. There are also the reports of tortured wailing or moaning emanating from the island's various darkened buildings, as well as inexplicable tolling of the bell tower bell even when no one is there, an especially creepy thought considering the tower's sedated history. Some shaken witnesses have described picking around in the remains of the old asylum and being commanded by unearthly voices to leave and never come back. And it's not uncommon for people to report seeing shadowy figures skulking around the dim ruins of the island. Psychics who have visited the island in particular have described it as a harrowing place filled with malignant, long-suffering, and very angry, vicious entities that seem to have nasty and malicious disdain for trespassers. Most such psychics have found this potent, malevolent energy so unbearable, traumatic, that they refuse to return. And I would see why. Okay, where was I? Other ghostly encounters are more aggressive and physical reports of being pushed, nudged, or shoved by invisible hands are not uncommon. And there are cases of attacks by unseen forces. Unseen forces that are almost brutal in nature. One of the most infamous ghostly incidents on the island was captured on film by the TV Ghost Adventures, where Shirley got even more than they had bargained for. In 2009, the crew, along with its host Zach Baggin basically stranded themselves on the island for 24 hours to see what they would come up with. Immediately had their equipment given weird readings that were blazing off the charts. This was quickly followed by inexplicable equipment malfunctions and a pervasive, dire sense of dread that overcame all involved. The crew experienced disembodied voices and footsteps, EVP phenomenon, and captured mysterious orbs on camera. Okay. So far, so creepy. But things apparently got even more out of hand when Baggin apparently was wandering the island, provoking the spirits in Italian when he was seemingly viciously assaulted by an unseen and obvious unfriendly entity that appeared to want to possess him. In the footage, the terrified Baggin can be seen frailing and trying to fight off whatever it is that's tormenting him in such rage. Although there is no way to prove that this was real occurrence or that the actual ghosts were involved, it certainly remains a remarkable, eerie piece of footage. Whether it is really haunted or not, the island is certainly a place that invites fear and sense of desolation. The buildings that remain here, including a church, bell tower, a hospital, housing for hospital staff, and administrative buildings, are in various states of decay, with only very fleeting efforts to maintain them or erect support to stave off the entropy that threatens to send them toppling to the ground. Some of the buildings on the island are so choked with weeds and ivy that they are barely recognizable, instead appearing as mounds of vegetation with half-buried structures occasionally poking through, like some ancient, forgotten ruin in remote jungle. Within the buildings, it is nothing but murky corridors full of peeling paints, rooms with moldering abandoned furniture, torn discarded books, rusty medical equipment, and various other debris, all covered in an ever-present film of dust and grime. Occasional graffiti from illegal visitors to the island can be seen scrawled across the walls. Outdoors, one is never far from the thought that they could be treading over one of the buried mass graves of the countless plague victims, or that much of the muck in the soil here is permeated with human ash and blood. Sometimes skulls or skeletons turn up unearthed out in the open, are washed up on shore, or dragged up by fishermen nets in the surrounding waters. Grim reminders of what this place once was, it seems that one is never far from the forgotten relics of death and decay on this island. The place has definite air of evil, and if it is not truly haunted, then somehow seems like it should be. Okay. Include some pictures here that they have for you guys. Currently, the island is uninhabited and is used mostly for agricultural purposes such as vineyards, and sinister rumors and history for the most part seem to do a good job of keeping most people at bay. It is said that fishermen tend to avoid the island, and the only time most people are willing to go there is to harvest the grapes in the island vineyards. For those that have morbid curiosity or a macabre fascination with the most haunted island in the world, it is possible to venture there, but due to the Italian government's closure of the island to tourists, it requires a special permit obtained through a load of arduous paperwork. Even having a permit is by no means a guarantee of reaching the island, as few boats are willing to go there, and those that do are expensive and intermediate. Despite the government's ban on visiting this island, it has become a popular place for thrill seekers hoping to see something bizarre or ghostly. Okay. It seems distinctly odd that in the middle of one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world, among burgeoning resorts and just a stone's throw away from Venice's famous Grand Canal, there is this rotting, neglected island of dread that no one goes to. Although Venetians have tried to downplay the island's creepy reputation and horrific past, the island is still seen by much of the outside world as a ghoulish, feral place full of dark death. This somber reputation and the lurid stories that circulate about the island have proven to be a hurdle for those wishing to develop the island into yet another resort. In 2014, the Italian government announced that it would issue a 99-year lease to a potential buyer in an attempt to ease its public debt, with the hope that any takers would turn the land into a tourist resort, or has been done with other lagoon islands such as Sacchia, Sassola, and San Clemente. Such plans have met opposition from locals who resist the ever-tightening grip of mass tourism on their historical city, with many beloved locations transformed in recent years into mazes of luxury hotel resorts and souvenir shops populated by throngs of visitors and a canopy of noise. At least one local group wants to turn the island into more of a relaxing recreation avenue rather than another luxury resort, with 2/3 of the island available to public for outdoor activities such as camping and picnicking. Locals hope to raise enough money to pay the lease and move forward with their plans. With this island's horrific, gloomy past, the persistent legends of spectators, and ghostly stalking its ruins, seems that any plans to turn the spooky island into a resort or even a recreational area is likely to be a hard sell. When hearing all the stories, it is natural to wonder if perhaps this island really is the lair of ghosts, or the very least an intangible evil force. Or what if its past has somehow become imprinted upon it? Much of the image becomes imprinted on like a photograph. How much horror does this place have to endure before it becomes absorbed into its very fabric? How many grotesqueries must play out in a location history before the suffering and horror somehow congenially materializes into our reality? Is this perhaps what has happened to this island? Whatever the case may be, the Ceballan Island is certainly a place that has seen a long history of tragedy and certainly has earned its place as the world's creepiest islands. So, that is the story. I am going to see if I find any other interesting information about it, or some pictures for you guys. Let's see what we got. Pretty much the same. The doctor, I'm just looking to see if there's any good pictures of it. It's actually not a very big piece of land, I'll tell you that much. When you see the pictures, you'll see what I mean. It's not that big at all. And the insides, some really cool pictures of the insides. I'm over here looking through to see for you guys so you can see it. Oh, that's a good one. Nice and creepy. I think you could actually see the bell tower in this picture. I'll tell you one thing, would definitely be interesting to see if any of these rumors are true, or if it's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Because, you know, people hear a story and then they go to the police and they, like, play themselves into hearing and seeing shit. So you never do know if they really are seeing anything or hearing anything, or, you know what I mean? So it's like one of those things you have to, like, do yourself. Okay. I think that about does it with the pictures, guys. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed this story, and please leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Okay, guys, as promised, I am back with another creepy story. This is a true story. We are going to label it The Evil